morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim. We continue our journey with Chapter 32. Well, the time drew near for the pilgrims to continue on their way, and they began to prepare for their journey. They sent for their friends and conferred with them, and they spent some time committing one another to the protection of their prince. Their friends brought them some things that they might need for their journey, things fit for the weak as well as the strong, and things for the women as well as the men. Then they set out to resume their journey. Their friends accompanied them for a considerable distance, and before parting they once again committed each other to the protection of their king. Chapter 32, Part 2. They resume their journey. Those belonging to the pilgrims' company went on with great heart, leading the way. The women and children, being weaker, were able to move at only a moderate pace, and because of this, ready to halt and feeble-minded were encouraged, because they had others who could sympathize with their condition. Having left the townsfolk, and having said farewell to their friends, they quickly came to the place where Faithful had been put to death. They stopped there and thanked him who had enabled Faithful to bear his cross so well. They were thankful also that they had been so blessed and strengthened by his outstanding example of courage in the face of suffering. After this, they went on a good deal further, talking about Christian and Faithful, and how Hopeful had joined Christian following the death of Faithful. After a while they came to the hill Lucre, where the silver mine was that had drawn Demas away from his pilgrimage, and into which Bians was believed to have fallen and perished. So they stood and thought about it for a while. Then they came to that old monument, the Pillar of Salt, which stands over against the hill Lucre, within view of Sodom and its smelly lake. They marveled just as Christian had done before them, wondering why men of such learning and intelligence would become so blinded as to turn aside here. They took note that man's nature is not so much influenced by the misfortunes that others have suffered as it is by the allurements that act upon their foolish eyes. Then I saw that they went on until they came to the river that was on the near side of the Delectable Mountains. This is the river where the beautiful trees grow on both sides of the way, the leaves of which, if taken inwardly, are good against digestive ailments. Here the meadows are green all year long, and they provide a pleasant place where pilgrims may safely rest. Chapter 32, Part 3. The Good Shepherd. Here in the meadow by the river, there were pens and folds for sheep, and a house built for the nourishing and raising of lambs, the babies of women who go on pilgrimage. There was someone here, entrusted with their care, who gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Christiana encouraged her 4 daughters-in-law to commit their little ones to the care of this man, that alongside these waters they might be sheltered, kept, loved, and nurtured, and that none of them might be lacking in the time to come. If any of the lambs go astray or get lost, this man will bring them back again. He will also bind up that which is broken, and will strengthen those who are sick. Here they will never lack for food or drink or clothing, and they will be protected from thieves and robbers. For this man would lay down his life before allowing one of these little ones committed to his trust to be lost. Here too the children will most assuredly receive good nurture and admonition, and will be taught to walk in the paths of righteousness. And this, of course, is a blessing of tremendous worth. Also here, as you see, are tranquil waters, pleasant meadows, delicate flowers, and varieties of trees that bear only wholesome fruit. Not fruit like Matthew ate that reached over the wall from Beelzebub's garden. The fruit of these trees produces health where there is none, and sustains and increases health where it already exists. Understandably, then, the mothers were pleased to commit their little ones to his care, and knowing that their king was in charge of everything, including the hospital for young children and orphans, was a further encouragement in making this decision. Chapter 32, Part 4. Their decision to go to Doubting Castle. As they continued on, they came to Bypath Meadow, and to the steps over which Christian had gone with his friend Hopeful, causing them to be taken by Giant Despair and put into Doubting Castle. Here they decided to sit down and discuss what the best thing to do might be. Since they were strong and had such a mighty man as Greatheart for their guide, they wondered whether or not the best thing to do would be to make an assault on the giant. Perhaps they could demolish his castle and set any pilgrims free who might be imprisoned in it. So they discussed the idea, but one said one thing and another said just the opposite. One questioned whether or not it was lawful to go on unholy ground. Another said it was all right if their purpose was good. Then Greatheart said, "Although this last assertion cannot be universally true, still I have been given a command to resist sin, to overcome evil, and to fight the good fight of the faith. And please tell me, with whom should I fight this good fight, if not with Giant Despair? I will therefore attempt to take his life and demolish Doubting Castle." Then he asked, "Who will go with me?" "I will," said Mr. Honest. "And so will we," chimed in Christiana's 4 sons, Matthew, Samuel, James, and Joseph. For they were strong young men. So they left the women on the road, and with them Feeble-Mind and Ready to Halt, along with his crutches, to be guards until their return. For even though Giant Despair lived nearby in that place, if pilgrims kept on the road, a little child might lead them. Chapter 32, Part 5. Confrontation with Giant Despair. So Greatheart, along with Mr. Honest and the 4 young men, went over the steps on their way to Doubting Castle to look for Giant Despair. When they came to the castle gate, they made an unusual clatter as they knocked at the gate. At that, the old giant came to the gate, and his wife Distrust followed him. Then he demanded, "Who is he, and what does he want? Who is so hardy and presumptuous as to disturb the Giant Despair in this way?" "It is I, Greatheart. I belong to the king of the celestial country, and I guide pilgrims to their place. I demand that you open your gates so that I may enter. Also prepare to fight, for I have come to remove your head and to demolish Doubting Castle." Now Giant Despair, because he was a giant, thought no man could overpower him. He thought to himself, "Since I have conquered angels, shall I be afraid of Greatheart?" So he harnessed himself in all his gear and went out. He had a helmet of steel on his head, a breastplate of fire strapped to him, and iron shoes on his feet. He carried a huge club in his hand. The 6 men wasted no time attacking him, both from behind and in front. When Distrust, the giantess, came to help him, old Mr. Honest struck her down with one blow. They fought for all they were worth, and Giant Despair was brought down to the ground, but didn't want to die. He struggled hard, and as they say, had as many lives as a cat. But Greatheart pressed hard and overcame the giant, refusing to let up until he had cut the giant's head from his shoulders. Chapter 32, Part 6. Despondency and Much Afraid are delivered. Then they went about the business of demolishing Doubting Castle. This was not a difficult task now that Giant Despair was dead, but it still took them 7 days to destroy it. Within the castle they found 2 prisoners, Mr. Despondency, who was nearly starved to death, and his daughter Much Afraid. These 2 were brought out alive, but a huge number of dead bodies lay all over the castle yard, and the dungeon also was full of dead men's bones. After Greatheart and his companions had completed this feat, they took Mr. Despondency and his daughter Much Afraid under their protection. They were honest people, in spite of the fact that they had been prisoners of the tyrant Giant Despair in Doubting Castle. The men buried the bodies of the giant and his wife under a heap of stones, but they took his head with them, and they brought it down to the road to show their companions what they had accomplished. Chapter 32, Part 7. A Joyful Celebration. When Feeble-Mind and Ready to Halt saw it was indeed the head of Giant Despair, they were filled with joy and merriment. It so happened that Christiana could play the violin, and her daughter-in-law Mercy could play the guitar. Since they were all so happy, the 2 began to play them a song. Ready to Halt wanted to dance, so he took Despondency's daughter Much Afraid by the hand and began to dance right there in the road. True, he could dance only with the aid of a crutch in his hand, but you have my word, he did quite well, and the girl also was to be commended, for she danced to the music beautifully. As for Mr. Despondency, the music wasn't of much interest to him, being that he was nearly starved. He was much more concerned about eating than he was about dancing. So Christiana gave him something to drink, and prepared a meal for him to eat. In a short time, the old gentleman was feeling relieved. Now I saw in my dream that after all their festivities had ended, Greatheart took the head of Giant Despair and set it on a post by the side of the highway, right next to the monument that Christian had erected to caution pilgrims who had come thereafter. Then he placed a marble stone under it, upon which he had written these words: "This is the head of him whose very name in former times brought pilgrims to shame. His castle's down, and distrust his wife, brave Greatheart has bereft of life. Despondency, his daughter much afraid, Greatheart for them also the man has played. Whoever has doubts, if he'll but turn his eye upon this post, may it his doubts satisfy. This head also, when doubting cripples dance, although the doubting castle's now destroyed, and Giant Despair of his head is devoid, sin can rebuild the castle, make it remain, and bring Despair the giant to life once again. Shows that from fears they've found deliverance." And that's the end of chapter 32. Next week we'll continue with chapter 33, with the shepherds on the Delectable Mountains. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.